In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Give us, O Lord, graciously your Holy Spirit. Guide us from within. Show us your light, your discernment. Incline our will toward yours. We ask you this through the powerful intercession of Our Lady, who is always present among us. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So, hello, everybody. Welcome back again to a second video on finding our way in spiritual life. It is a very important idea to sort of try to find our way. The first video explained the first part of the journey, but then I think there are some questions already. We will see, hopefully, God willing, the following section of the journey of growth. But I think there are some questions and that some of you have, and I think it's very important to be able to sort of adjust ourselves and understand what could be done with this precious information and teaching from the saints. So please go ahead. I don't know, whoever, Mathieu, Francesca, whoever wants to start the question, we are all ears. Go ahead.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, now.
Yes. Hi. Sorry. Good afternoon. Yeah, Francesca, I hope you don't mind. I'll go first. It's silent here now. I've been wondering and listening to what you've been also writing about in your book of the journey, also according to Saint Therese of Avila, and about the practical use of knowing this journey, of knowing the stages, of knowing where we are, and whether we are supposed to know where we are or not. Because she seems to say in her book, or you seem to say that in her book, it says that these stages, these mansions, knowing a bit where we are would help us along the way, knowing what we can do, where we should be going. And then on the other hand, I've also heard you say that it's better for us not to know exactly where we are, especially in one of the courses on spiritual direction. You're giving some advice that actually the spiritual directee doesn't have to know always where they are. So that's one question. Yes, and also how the example of this young boy who was recently, was he beatified, Carlos Acuti? Yep. For such a young boy, would he have gone through these stages, all of them? Perhaps, I guess in a much quicker way than most of us, or would he have felt this or known this if he'd had this information? Is it always necessary to know this? Anyway, there's, I'm sure, a lot there that you could answer.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Francesca, would you like to add something, or shall I start and then maybe you interact after? It's up to you.
Do begin.
Okay. So let us address this important issue. Is the teaching of the doctors of the church who are specialized in spiritual life. Think of St. Catherine of Siena, St. Bonaventura, St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Therese of the Child Jesus, and many others. I was mentioning just the doctors of the church among them, but there are other also masters in spiritual life. There are plenty of saints who wrote also. I would say it's not the same level or the same importance and the same grace involved in the process of inspiration and writing. When the church declares somebody doctor of the church, the church itself sees in this person, say John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, sees in their teaching something of great relevance for the life of the church. This is why at a certain point then in time, the church, becoming aware of this importance, will declare, after long consultation of universities, bishops, etc., will declare this or that saint doctor of the church, which means the body of the teaching of this person is of certain relevance, importance, and not all the doctors are the same. Some of them are specialized in spiritual life, some others more general in theology. You have St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Jerome for the Bible, another saint for moral theology, Filippo Neri, if I'm not, Alphonse of Liguori, if I'm not wrong, sorry, etc., etc. So also we need to bear this in mind. They're not talking about the same subject all the time. So all the doctors. Now, as you can see, I prefer, if you don't mind, just to draw very quickly the journey as the complete journey, as it is. I do present it in some of the writings, and of course, it takes into consideration great deal of the teaching of St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. So, if you don't mind, let me just quickly draw the journey, and then maybe discuss your precise questions that are in fact extremely important, because yeah, they wrote, what use can we make of this, and also what are the pitfalls. So very quickly now, I'm following here roughly St. Teresa of Avila, and then I will add a few bits added after, more recently by Father Louis Guillet, who and Father Marie-Eugène a little bit, but then Father Louis Guillet really added it in a much clearer way. So here we have first mentions of Teresa of Avila, second mentions, third mentions. As you can see, the thirds are the odd numbers are rather a plateau, stable, more or less stable states. Then we start right after that with the second conversion here. We have the fourth mentions, then the fifth mentions, then we go almost vertical, six mentions, but six mentions, of course, incomplete in Teresa of Avila. We need to add a little bit of the Dark Night of St. John of the Cross, which I would say is very shortly alluded to in one of the chapters of the six mentions. So we have here the fourth, then the fifth mentions, then this radical change here. There is a turning point here. Then hopefully we reach spiritual engagement, spiritual betrothal here, spiritual betrothal here. I will draw a cross. And then there is a plateau, sort of plateau here. Increase, and then we go down, and then down again, to reach roughly this same line here, which then will be here our death, Christian death, as it is described by John of the Cross. In the first video, of course, I only addressed the area here between the fourth and the fifth mentions, but just allow me to give you a quick general drawing of the entire journey. Here, as I said, here you have the spiritual marriage in this little cross here. Then you have the celebration of the marriage. Then you have an intensification. Then you have here the flares of the Holy Spirit starts to be more clearly active here. And then we might also have here a participation into the passion of the Lord until we reach down here death. It seems odd maybe for some to draw like a mountain initially. We are climbing, and then suddenly we are going down the mountain. That could be new for many, because we are only taught to sort of look toward a union with God, and then after union with God, we think that we're waiting for death. But in fact, there are other steps. I owe this to specifically to Father Louis Guillet, French priest. Unfortunately, we don't have anything written in English by him, it's all in French. Louis Guillet, 1902-1992. 1992. He's a French Carmelite, priest. Yeah. So, facing this journey, the first question, or the question you're asking, which is, okay, well, we rejoice. Our first reaction is great, fantastic. We are glad to discover that. We want to realize all this journey, and we say, okay, please give me the tools, give me the means. I want to grow. I want to do all what I can. I want to reach that goal. Now, is this reaction good and healthy? This reaction is 1,000,000% good and healthy. Take Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. She writes about it in the Story of the Soul. At the age of 17 years old, she had the immense luck, very audacious for her time, to enter with, I think she entered, it was landed to her, this book, took it, I think, from home, this book of St. John of the Cross, the second part of it, or something along these lines. Anyway, she had the second volume of the works of St. John of the Cross translated into French, where she found the Spiritual Canticle and the Living Flame. By the way, these are very, very advanced books. The Living Flame, by the way, just addressed, please look here where on the board, addresses the journey from more or less this point here till the end, the death. More on the what is happening deep inside of us, not addressing any participation in the passion or any of this, but just from within what is happening in us. For instance, the flares of the Holy Spirit I'm talking about here, the intensification of the action of the Holy Spirit in the human being is happening very, it's described very much in this book, Living Flame of Love, St. John of the Cross. So she read all this, but what was her reaction? This is what we want to know today. How to react, what use can we make of this? The reaction was very clear, very straightforward. Lord, she prayed, Lord, I want all that I'm reading to be realized in me. 17 years old prayer. See, so we can't say, no, I don't want that. This is too high. Teresa of Avila will scream and say, no, you're wrong in doing this, because that's a lack of humility. John of the Cross will scream also his way. He will say, not wanting to reach that fullness of love is an offense to God. So we are very, very far from that today. We have a long series of misunderstandings, of misinterpretation of the thoughts of these great doctors of the church. So the reaction is healthy, to want all this, to want it firmly, with great determination, with great enthusiasm, with magnanimity, which is having a soul that accepts the immensity of the grace of God. And otherwise, it could be, as St. Teresa of Avila mentions it in The Way of Perfection, could be a lack of humility or a false humility, as she says. There are people who say, no, 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 these things are too high for me. It's not for me. I'm a little person. I don't want this. That's not for me. I'm so sorry. And they leave it. Teresa of Avila says this is false humility. False humility. So as you can see, St. Therese of the Child Jesus, the French one, Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, didn't dismiss that point, that idea. So, wanting the goal, yes. Now, let us go now into greater details. Sorry. What does this line of growth, this graph of growth, from here, first mentions till here, Christian death, in the end here, where I hope you can see the mouse, the arrow. What does this entire graph journey mean? What is it showing us? Is it showing us what we feel, what we sense, what we can see, what we can be sure of, or something else? It shows us, in fact, something completely different. It shows us deep, deep inside of us what God realizes, the journey of growth in us. Now, there is a very important issue here. Can we see, can we sense, can we know with certainty, or if you prefer, does our spiritual director, can our spiritual director, or is he supposed, or is he or she supposed to know exactly where we are with absolute certainty? Here we need to be very careful. Here we need to be very careful. So allow me to show you another drawing, and I will come back to this one, don't worry. So this line describes not the palpable, visible, something you can sense or see or understand with certainty about our growth. No, it shows us what God is deep inside in our spirit, which is beyond our consciousness. I will draw that immediately now. So do we have access to that? And how can we have access to that? And etc. You see? So let me draw another picture here. So the classic drawing I often do, which is describing the human being. So I draw it this way. I take, you remember, like a slice of a cake. And then I divide it in different parts, or show different parts of the human being. At the center of the human being, which would be then the pointy part of the cake that I removed, would be God himself. Then you have in the upper part of our being, which is the soul here, and the soul is composed of our mind, will, and you may add memory if you want as the main faculties, but there are plenty of other faculties in the soul. These are the highest ones. Now, the tip of the soul, here I draw it as here as being our spirit. So our spirit. So it's small s, not capital S. Our spirit is still part of us. It's still part of the soul, but it's like the eye of the soul. And let me just finish the description, and then I'll explain what is happening here. Now, you may put here, if you want, our emotions. So we are still in the soul. Then we have the body. So we have the senses, the 5 senses. Of course, we have the brain, if you want to be very detailed. It's still in the body, but in connection, mysterious connection with the soul. Now, few things to add to this drawing. Very important elements to add to this drawing. Now, we have like a veil. Of course, I won't go into details about when we grow, what happens to this veil, etc. But just take what I'm saying for now. So there is a veil, V-E-I-L, that separates the upper part of the soul from the spirit. Now, when God communicates himself to us, he communicates himself essentially to our spirit here. Okay, so there is a life, a divine life that starts to grow and happen here between God and our spirit. Sometimes, and I insist here, sometimes some of these graces, not of these graces, some of signs, created signs of these graces can very well fall into the upper part of the soul, into our emotions, and into our senses. Okay, perception, feeling, and understanding or seeing with the mind. What characterizes the human being below the veil, so from this line here, the green line, downward, is awareness, consciousness, perception. What characterizes life above the veil is supraconsciousness, above consciousness. Okay, so the line of the veil is a line of perception. Anything that we can see with our mind, understand with our mind, have a light in our mind. And when I say mind, it's mind and brain if you want, yeah, but it's mind. It's one of the main faculty of the soul with the will and the memory. Okay, so anything that could be perceived in the mind, understood in the mind by a light received by God, anything that we can feel here in our emotion or sense in our senses, all this is part of our conscious perception, if you want. It's perception, it's consciousness, it's awareness. Okay, I'm using modern expressions, but the concept itself of this distinction above the veil and below the veil exists very clearly in St. John of the Cross if you read him carefully. It's not that clear with St. Teresa of Avila. It starts to be a little bit clear toward the end of her life when she writes her masterpiece, the Interior Castle, especially in the 7th mentions. She does talk about the distinction between the spirit and the soul, but she says she gives us 2 examples to describe the difference between the spirit and the soul. She assures us that there is a difference between the spirit and the soul, but she doesn't have the tools to go further. John of the Cross does go way further than that. This is why John of the Cross is absolutely fundamental in spiritual life. Okay, now coming back to our questions. Our question is, what are we supposed to do with this description? The journey. As I said, this journey describes, in fact, what is happening in our spirit. It doesn't say necessarily, always, what are the repercussions, the echoes, the crumbs that fall, created crumbs, because the God communicates itself is an uncreated God. Here, the red is uncreated. Anything here like this sort of clear green, yellowish green, is a created grace given, communicated to our mind, will, memory, our emotions, and our senses. Okay, so I might or might not receive something from God in my mind, will, brain, and sorry, I don't know why, and senses. I can, I may not, I may or may not. Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus says, I spent my entire life, her entire journey, not wanting to see God. Because I know, let me finish the quote, because I know that God cannot be seen here in this lifetime. What do we mean by that? The very essence of God, his uncreated nature, can only be seen by our spirit. This is me talking here and explaining, and John of the Cross. But what she meant by that, she meant that the soul, which has the mind and the emotions, and the body, which has the senses, the brain and the senses, cannot in any way perceive God directly, neither in this life nor in the coming life. It is a shocking statement, I understand, especially if I say neither next life, nor next life. If you want to make sure that what I'm saying is completely orthodox, you can check it on the last stanza of the spiritual canticle, where John of the Cross surprisingly says that the soul and the body cannot see God directly. What they see is in heaven. They see his the manifestation of his glory that the soul and the body can bear, can receive. Why? He explains, because the container of the body, emotions, and soul are still too small compared to the very nature of God. But it doesn't end here. He says that the spirit, already from this life, So this life and the next life, our spirit enters in direct contact with God, is purified, transformed, and enlarged again, back again. We are created at his image and likeness. We lose his likeness, and we gain back this likeness by the journey. This journey that you saw is a transformation of purification, enlargement of our spirit, so our spirit can enter in direct contact and union with God. So when we speak about union, we don't talk about the effects of union in the soul, emotions, and body. We talk about the union between our spirit and God. Does this have a direct, immediate effect on the soul and the senses? The answer is no, normally no. It can have created effects, but it can not have at all any created effects, which is the case of the Lord during his passion in his human nature. It is the case of Our Lady. It is the case of, I would say, the majority of the saints when they are called to go deeper in the love of their brothers and sisters and carry their cross and carry them. As St. Therese of the Child Jesus, God made me sit amongst the sinners. What does it mean? You see, it's a very mysterious statement. It means that the veil becomes totally thick, doesn't allow anything, any created crumbs to fall, and therefore, and the soul and the body are invaded by the darkness of the sins of the brothers and sisters. So she's taking her part as a true bride and mother of the souls. She's taking her part, her share of the application of the salvation to about her brothers and sisters. So now, when we understand this clear distinction, we can easily understand the consequences. Is that how can I measure either myself, if I'm just at the receiving end of this teaching, or other people's life, if I am spiritual director? How can I measure the growth of the person if the main thing that I'm trying to measure is beyond the consciousness of the person and of mine, of course, obviously. And don't go there telling me, oh, I got an inspiration and God told me that this person reached that point. Don't go there. This is dangerous. Playing with this is very dangerous. Don't go there. You see? Now, you understand the difficulty. So the question is, how then can we know? How then can we? Is it possible to say that there is no perception at all? I haven't said that there is no perception. Saint Teresa of Avila describes her experience of God, describes the first stages. Let me go back here. Teresa of Avila, when she describes the graces she receives in the fourth and fifth mansions in her life, she doesn't say, I am at the fifth, I am at the fourth, okay? When she describes them, you know, prayer of quiet, the entering in the supernatural, as she calls it, in the beginning of the fourth mansions, which is equivalent to the moment some graces, of course, received before her conversion, but really a powerful boost in her life at the moment of her conversion. She describes all the graces she received. Of course, there are things that are perceived, but what is perceived? As I described in the previous video, she talks about the water, but the water bears many different meanings. You remember? Let me show you the drawing of the other day. So here, no, when we are the fourth and fifth mansions, maybe, yeah, you can say, we can follow a little bit where the person is, but we need still to be very careful. So when she talks about water, it could be the grace itself communicated to the spirit, you remember that? It could be a consolation received, which means what? Something that falls in the conscious part. And it could be tears. But essentially, what is important is the grace of God communicated to the spirit. So what does it mean? Can we discern? How can we discern? She says, when I write, the people who have the experience will understand me. Yes, but how will they understand you? From the exterior effects. Are there regular, constant exterior effects? Yes and no. We need to be careful. The answer is yes and no. Yes and no. Here lies the slight difficulty. Now, in the case of Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, which in a way, as she was understood by many in the last century, especially Carmelite fathers, as the embodiment of the teaching of Saint John of the Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. So the best example of the implementation of their teaching is Therese. The best way to discern what is, am I understanding properly John of the Cross? Am I understanding properly Saint Teresa of Avila? You go to Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus. This is why it's an interpretative triangle. You need to use Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, or John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and Saint Therese. Therese being the implementation of that. So now, did she always feel? Can we compare her to Teresa of Avila? I hear your objection, but how come then Teresa of Avila felt all this? I like very much a comment made by, if I'm not wrong, Thomas Alvarez, who is a great specialist in Saint Teresa of Avila, Spanish, he's Spanish, Father Thomas Alvarez, Carmelite. He said, and that was the advice given to his students in Rome when he was teaching in Rome. He said that, how can we read Teresa of Avila? He said, take Teresa of Avila as a magnifying glass. Whatever she describes, in fact, is whatever is happening in us, but with a magnifying glass. I like very much this image, and it is true. Teresa of Avila sort of emphasizes things a little bit. So just consider that she is amplifying whatever is happening inside. So can we say that Saint Therese of the Child Jesus didn't experience any of what Teresa of Avila does? No, she did, but it's more subtle, if you want. Teresa of Avila falls when she has ecstasies. She falls on the floor, she loses consciousness, her body becomes a bit too hard, etc. She comes back, her bones are aching, etc. Therese of the Child Jesus never fell on the floor, never had any of these type of ecstasies. Does this mean that Therese didn't go through any of what Teresa of Avila went through? No, she did. This is my opinion. She did. She did. But does it have to appear exactly as Teresa of Avila is describing it? No. The essence of it, yes. So this is, I would say, the art of making use of the advice or making use of the description. It's to sort of see that there is an emphasis or an it's the magnifying glass is increasing the intensity or the description, but it's there happening inside of us. Okay. Now, first and foremost, what do we find in what John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, just for the sake of taking examples, in their writings when they describe the journey? Where does John of the Cross describe the journey? Spiritual Canticle, essentially, if you want. That's the structured masterpiece of John of the Cross. He takes us from the beginning till almost till the end of the journey of growth. Okay. Teresa of Avila, a masterpiece is Interior Castle. Interior Castle takes us from zero till the union with God, and some indications on what we should behave within this last final state of union with God. So when we read these sort of books that are built, if you want, stage after stage, step after step, what am I gaining from it? It's very important to know, because this is why my answer is yes and no. If you ask me, are we supposed to know where we are? Yes and no. You see, what are we supposed to do then with these books? So let me just go back to that point again. What Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross describe, more Teresa of Avila because she describes the experience itself. John of the Cross describes a little bit the experience, which is true, but then he gives a lot of theological insight of what is happening deep inside of us, because we can't see it. If you don't have his tools, faith, his philosophical and theological training, you can't reach where he's going. It's impossible. So the grace of God even cannot help him to reach. You see, so you need that intellectual input in order to know, which is the case of the intrinsic value. She doesn't have this input, so it's limited because she describes only what she feels, what she senses. She asks questions to theologians, she gets answers, but she's not formed as, for instance, John of the Cross. And he certainly, during his 5 years in Avila, when he was with her, helped her a lot to understand herself and to sort of maybe adjust at the level also of discernment. Okay, now, what can I gain from this description? For myself, not as a direct spiritual director, but first as a faithful following Jesus, okay? First, I might recognize the description she makes of what is happening when we pray. This is what she says. You pray, you practice prayer of the heart, for instance, you practice the virtues, and this can happen to you. So especially during prayer, she describes for instance, the prayer of quiet, which is one of the main first manifestations of the supernatural action of God. You can have the supernatural recollection, which is slightly before it. I very rarely mention it, or it's simply prayer of quiet. What is prayer of quiet? Is the direct, look here at the picture, the arrow, the arrow where it's going, is following this arrow, the direct intervention of God, direct personal intervention of God, taking our spirit and immersing our spirit in his being and nourishing our spirit and transforming, purifying our spirit into his being. Okay? Now, does this have repercussions on us? You need to go back to, for instance, the first level course and see how I described the prayer of quiet, the discernment there, the difference between prayer of quiet and prayer of union. Where prayer of union, you will feel the difference. Why? Because the mind, the will, and the memory are taken and absorbed by God. While in the prayer of quiet, no, you can be full of distractions and very well having your spirit immersed in God. You see? So you have a description, yes, but what use can I do? First, I might recognize what is happening to me described by her, and this is what she says, by the way. I'm not forcing her text in a direction or another. She says that whoever has the experience will understand what I'm saying, especially, for instance, when she describes prayer of quiet. Where can you find it? You find it in the book of her life, when she starts to describe the second way of watering the garden, and you can find that also in the book of the Way of Perfection, chapter 20, 28, 29, 30 and 31, she describes the prayer of quiet, but you can start very easily from 28, 29, to read also 28 and 29, which is what am I supposed to do in order to receive this action of God. Now, to recognize what is happening, yes, but there is a risk. Why? When we undergo a journey of growth in a spiritual life, we grow in this way, either upward or downward, it doesn't matter. Say we are going deeper, so we start here above, and then we go down. Now, spiritual life is almost going back to the same points, to the same elements, but on a deeper level. So, for instance, in the beginning of my journey, I will experience certain things. But then after a while, 1 or 2 years, I will experience something that looks like it, but it's deeper. Think of how many times we read the same text in the gospel, no? Think, just to help you a little bit. How many times do we read the same text in the gospel? We're never bored. Why? Because every time the Lord, the Holy Spirit, is going deeper and deeper in us. So he might address another point, say for instance here, and then sometime after he will come back to it, but in a deeper way. So the journey continues. We are going back to the same different points, because on the circle you have different points, no? If we're looking at the circle from above, if we're looking on this I forgot the word. Can you help me here? These Elise,
Spiral.
say again.
Spiral.
Spiral. Yes, thank you. If you look at the spiral from above, what can you see? You just see one circle. So you have the impression, you might have the impression that you're going in circles, but in fact, you're not going in circles in spiritual life. You're going back to the same points, but on a deeper level. It's true that we're exploring the infinite. We are in contact with the infinite, God himself, but still we have a body, we have an existence, we have 24 hours, we have 12 months. So we go back to even the liturgy. Every year we go through the same liturgy. Every day the mass is the same. You are never bored. Why? Because you go back to the same thing, but on a different level, on a different depth, etc. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because you might read Teresa of Avila. So here is Teresa of Avila. Let me draw green. So she's our helper. Okay, so she's here walking beside us and describing to us, the different stages where she's going. So this is a stage, this is another stage, this is another stage. So say you are reading somewhere in her writing about the description she makes of a grace. So say, I don't know, say prayer of quiet or prayer of union, better, prayer of union. So you say, oh, fantastic. I think I went through something along these lines. But you yourself don't know that in the 7 mentions, she will offer you a description that is very similar, which is a Martha and Mary, no? Martha and Mary. Very similar, but there's nothing to do between the 5th mentions or the 4th mentions and the 7th mentions, the union with God. There's nothing to do with it. So what happens is that you can project your thought on it and say, okay, I am there. So you sort of create a fusion between you and the book you're reading or the stage you're reading and say, okay, since I have the impression that I'm feeling it, so therefore, unconsciously, you say, you say, okay, I'm there. And you rejoice and I'm happy. And maybe you're inflating your spiritual ego and you don't know it, okay? So it goes bigger and bigger and bigger, which is also one of the pitfalls. So this is why it's a fine line. The answer is yes and no. Yes for certain reasons and no for other reasons, and we need to sort of be prudent. So prudence is this yes and no. So this is why discernment and prudence and humility are fundamental. We are playing with fire. The spiritual journey is like fire in your hands. So if you don't know how to manage this fire, it can burn you. This is why it's very important to keep humility throughout the journey. And the more we grow, the more humility should grow, not the less, the more it should grow. And what is humility? Humility is the truth. So avoiding fake imaginations and fake projections, etc. So this is just an example. There is a description possible from Teresa of Avila, but the description is always from outside, not from inside what is happening in the spirit. She cannot reach what is happening in the spirit. She deduces it, but never addresses it, putting her finger on it and saying, look, this is what's happening, which is the case of John of the Cross. He can put his finger and say, look, this is what is happening. You don't see it, but this is what is happening inside, okay? Now, so here is one of the pitfalls. Why is it useful? Because it can help me. But if I lose humility, if I lose prudence, if I lose obedience to God through a spiritual director or whatever, and you can suffer because of a wrong spiritual director, that's possible. Teresa of Avila is capable of telling you that they harmed her on her journey. She does say it. And John of the Cross also very fierce against spiritual directors. But in the same time, we need them. But we need them with certain qualities. And this is our struggle throughout the ages. It will be the same, okay? So do you see here why I ask for certain prudence? So this is just to lay the foundation of a certain explanation of why we should be careful. Now, allow me, if you don't mind, because that's just the beginning of the story. Eh? I know time is running, but I'm trying, as you see, to speak very quick. Now, So you saw the risk, etc. But let me enter a little bit deeper in the human being. I might be moving slightly a little bit towards the spiritual director task or mission in the church, but it applies for everybody, and I'm sure it will help you in a way or another. Now, I would like to distinguish. So let us try here to sort of draw the degree of perception, or degree of yeah, let us say of perception of what is happening in my life, in my spiritual life, to show you how complex is the issue. It's not just straightforward. You go, you press a button, yes, I know, no, I don't know, then Bob's your uncle, you go. No, it doesn't work like this. It is very, very delicate. So the first thing is, as I said, I'll draw a mind map, okay? The first element here, I would say, is to understand that the essential event or essential point that you or the spiritual director essentially is looking after is what is happening in our spirit. Okay, so this is what we'd like to access, but we can't access it directly. We access it only through different elements, through what we're doing every day, through sometimes the spiritual director may ask some questions just to understand what is happening, not out of curiosity, never out of curiosity, but just to try to understand in a way what is happening. Because the main difficulty of the spiritual director is that he or she doesn't live with you, so he can't see certain things. So if you are not totally open and saying what is happening, and here it is not that obvious and easy. Even if your will wants to say everything, you do not necessarily say everything, and this is what we are about to see right now. Okay, it's not a matter that I'm hiding something, but it's I'm not aware. I don't have the understanding, the proper understanding. Okay, so remember that our aim is to guess more or less the level of growth. Remember that the line I drew here is the line of growth of the spirit, our spirit. This line is not perception. This line is reality deep in us, and nobody sees it, neither us nor other persons. This is why Jesus says, do not judge. No, why? Because you can't see the heart. So the issue here now, how can we see the heart? Are we supposed to see the heart? What will happen then? Are we completely lost? Why did they describe then something? You see, that's the question. So let us go back to what I'm saying. So I will draw a line here, which is a line of like understanding, humility, that there is a mystery that we are trying very humbly to reach, but we need to be prudent. Prudent. So now, number two is what is perceived. What is perceived? I-E, E-I, God knows.
E-I.
E-I. Sorry about that. Okay. What is perceived? Perceived where? Just to give you a gist that it's not a plain answer. Perceived in the soul. And when I say soul, I say the mind. What is the mind? Is what you think, what you understand, what you would like to do appears first in your mind, and then of course appears in the will. Now, what is perceived where else? It's still the soul, but allow me to distinguish not the rational soul, but also the emotions. Emotions are a big part of our life. So when you have a spiritual life, you are still a human being and you still have emotions, you like it or not. And things can fall in your emotions, different, difficult, negative, positive emotions, and so on. Now, what else can be perceived? Where else things could be perceived? In the senses or in the body. You can add more because the body is more than just the senses in a way. Okay? So you perceived something, you think it's spiritual, you think it's coming from God, and this is only what you can perceive. Teresa of Avila, the whole description falls into this world that I am just deploying here. The soul, the emotions, and the senses, what is perceived. Otherwise, our spirit is not perceived. So we perceive what happens either through the fruits of what is happening or through the crumbs or perceptions that God can sometimes give us, but not always. Because we can guide ourselves by faith and the commandments of God, as St. John of the Cross puts it, and reason. Reason, faith, and commandments of God. These are the tools that John of the Cross offers us. He never said, feel the inspiration, and if you feel inspired, well, then do it this way. And if you receive a word and indication from God, then do it that way. No, he never said that. The greatest mystic, in my humble view, teacher, master, John of the Cross, says you can lean on three things. Reason. Strange, no? Having spiritual life, you lean on reason, that's nonsense. No, you lean on reason because you have 24 hours. You have to eat, you have to rest, you have to have, you have to work, you have to have relationships. All this is managed by reason. God will not ask us to do things that usually, no, of course, he can ask us to do some crazy things, but usually it falls into the structure of reason. Okay, so reason, the commandments of God, and all this is done in faith. You see, so these are our guiding lines. You see, commandments of God, when it's Lectio Divina, it's the commandments of God to understand what God is asking us to do, and to do it also with his grace. Okay, now, so this is what is perceived. Now, and this is a challenge. This is a first challenge. What is perceived? Can we draw some color here? I'm not sure. I don't remember now if we can do this. Can I do this like here? No, that's not the right one. Can I do it with this one? Yes. Here you are. Lovely. What is perceived? Then you have here our spirit. And then, sorry to be a bit detailed, but it's utterly useful in this case. So here I will write, sorry, what is understood. Perceiving is something. Understanding, which will involve interpretation. And here we need, of course, the help of God. We need the help of a good spiritual director, because you can perceive things, but you don't know how to explain what you are perceiving. You're all a bit lost, yes or no? You can be very well committed and everything, but you don't know how to explain what is happening to you. So we need the correct understanding and the correct interpretation of what has been perceived, you see? So it's not number 2. You haven't told me that I'm writing nonsense. So it's not number 2, it's number 3 here, okay? Now, another difficulty.
Jean, sorry, you also wrote was is understood, not what is understood.
Yes, voila. Somebody is here with me. No offense meant. So what is understood? Okay.
Yeah, WH, but that's okay.
Yes. Perfect. No, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I have a slight beginning of Alzheimer's, so it's sometimes I skip some things. Now, so understood interpretation. Now, number 4 here is expressing. What do I mean by expressing? I mean by expressing the fact that you want to transmit and tell others what is happening. You say it to yourself first, because you think. So you're saying it to yourself. You're expressing the interpretation with your own words. And you are saying it to the spiritual director. Now, saying it, of course, is important. But it's only what you perceived, not what is happening deep in you, because you don't have access to what is deep in you. You can talk about peace, you can talk about joy, fine. It tells something about the closeness of your spirit with God, that's fine. But after that, if you are talking about what is happening, your difficulties, your struggles, your way of praying, your relationships, how you exercise love, loving your neighbor, etc., you will say it according to whatever you perceived. You will prepare the moment where you will meet your spiritual director. You will gather your thoughts and where the difficulties are, etc. But what will happen? You will express it according to your own words, your own culture, your own knowledge, vocabulary. Are you a theologian? Are you a theologian specialized in spiritual life? No, you are trying to get a certain spiritual theological culture, what I call culture. Culture means cultivated. I have knowledge, even though I'm not necessarily a scholar. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about normal persons. Even though I'm not a scholar, I'm not a theologian, but I'm still reading and trying to find the words. This is why it's important to follow a formation in spiritual life in order to find the key words that help us recognize what is happening, find our bearings, use the tools in a correct way, and grow, you see. So expressing here is not something that is automatic. When I give spiritual direction, I'm giving spiritual direction to many people. So, but people are not the same. The person will come and try to describe according to her perception, her limited theological knowledge, with her image or his image, etc. So I have to cross these distances and try to understand what the person means by this, and that. So, and am I expressing properly? You might use a word, a theological word, thinking that you're doing well. Well, in fact, it's not the right word that describes your state. So expressing is another deal. You see, expressing what is happening is a difficulty. And the crossing between the conscious and unconscious, and what you're hiding, not on purpose, but what you're hiding unwillingly, it's full of things. This is why it's important from time to time for the spiritual director to ask the right questions and avoid sometimes to go in the same boat with the person. Like, I don't know, the person starts to talk about his or her prayer life, the grace is received, etc. And the spiritual director forgets completely that this person is a real person. She or he has a real life, and that you should worry as a spiritual director if everything in daily life is happening, is fine or not. Is there a love of the neighbor? Is there patience? Is there humility in daily life, not in theoretical prayer life. You see what I'm trying? I'm a bit severe here a little bit, okay? So you understand what I'm trying to say? It's not straightforward what is perceived. You go directly to expressing it. No, it's what is perceived, becomes understood, bears an interpretation. All this is unconsciously working, because I'm talking about normal people. I'm not talking about intellectual people who spend their day doing this. No, I'm talking about Joe Public, including priests and nuns, everybody. They are not specialized in this field. So as a consequence, perception leads to understanding, could be a wrong understanding, bearing with it interpretation, automatic, wrong, could be right, could be wrong, could be not enough, could be just partial, yeah, not enough. And then leading to expressing it. How do you say it? How do you word it yourself? So this is between us and ourselves, these four elements, and it's also what we will say or not say to our spiritual director. So do you see the complexity of the story? It's not because I read something or I know that we should grow that I immediately jump on it and say, okay, now I'm here, I am there because I perceived this, etc. No, between you perceived, you understood, and you expressed, and then it was checked by somebody, and it could be wrongly checked. Unfortunately, I'm not trying to make life hard. I'm just trying to show you how delicate the issue is. We cannot play either with ourselves, with our spiritual life, like playing with toys, and we cannot play with the life of other people. It is a sacred thing. Your life, your spiritual life, your being is a sacred being, and the life of your brothers and sisters are as sacred as God, as sacred as Jesus. So utmost respect is needed here, and utmost prudence here. So don't go and tell me, oh, I think I know, I understood, etc. A bit of humility. Try to know more, try to be more humble, try to be more discerning, try to consult, try to learn, try to read, try to work intellectually in order to improve the tool, because if you are a spiritual director, you are the tool that God is using, you see. Impose on yourself plenty of exercises in order to be very flexible, and do not never claim to know everything or to be able to help everybody. No, that's not possible. It's rare, it's very difficult, it's almost impossible, you see, to claim, oh, I can solve the problem. What problem can you solve, you see? So I'm just trying to spread the different elements here. And remember that in all these three elements, which is here, number 2, number 3, and number 4, on top of course, I take for granted God is acting in our spirit, the three of them needs effort from our side, and also the grace of God. Teresa of Avila will say, one thing is the grace that is received, which is in the spirit. Another thing is to perceive it and understanding. She sort of blends number 2 and 3 here. And another thing is to express it. 3 different graces. The second and the third, or here the second, third, and fourth, are linked to what is happening deep in our being. Okay, they are. The main grace, of course, is number 1. No discussion. So what we need is to have the grace. Now, did we understand everything? Do we need to understand everything? We need to understand what we are supposed to do. Now, Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus, was she worrying where I am exactly? It doesn't transpire that she was worrying about it. What she was worried about was to please Jesus. Of course, we are dealing here with a very high perfection here. Teresa of the Child Jesus is really the maximum here. So, of course, you might feel that you're very far from this perfection of Saint Teresa. But this is what she was worried about. No, I want to please Jesus. I want to give him love because of love. And I am not accumulating goods. In a way, she would say, if she was here present among us, she might be saying, well, Jean, all this is just forget about all this, just focus on Jesus and try to follow him. This leads us to the question, the answer to the question, or was the young boy who was beatified recently, Carlo Acutis, did he go through all these steps of the journey described here? Yes, in a way, yes. The same degree, Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus says, no, what is important is not the size of the glass or the bottle or the barrel. What is important is that the glass is full, the barrel is full. We are different. Look at the plants, look at the flowers. We are very different one from the other. But what is important is to reach our fullness. It is true that this line that you can see here is a description of fullness, but it is the description of fullness not in front of our eyes, in front of the eyes of God. Was he guided to grow? Of course. Did he have challenges? Of course. But maybe he was such a fervent person and put full pressure that he reached the fullness in a very short time. Think of Teresa of the Child Jesus. She dies at 24 years old. At 24 years old. Elizabeth of the Trinity, 26. Teresa de los Andes, a bit less. St. Agnes, Cecilia, etc., the early martyrs, they die very young. Some of them 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old. Well, it doesn't mean that they haven't achieved the journey. They must have achieved the journey, but God sees it. Joan of Arc, certainly. Some other people, it takes them 80 years. Some other people will wake up here, this number, the junction here between 3 and 4, maybe the last 3 years of their life, or maybe the last 3 months, or maybe the last 3 weeks, or maybe the last 3 hours. It's difficult to measure this line that you see in front of you of growth, because it's a line of transformation. It is not a line of something you can measure with time. It's something that you can measure with commitment, the quality of commitment, the purity of the personal commitment, and the grace of God, which nobody can measure the power of the grace of God. One day in your house, Lord, is like 1,000 years. One day in your house, oh Lord, is like 1,000 years. Can you measure the grace of God? No. So you see why and how one needs to know. One needs to have like milestones. One needs a spiritual director to sort of at least make sure we are on the safe journey. Now we are not going astray here and there. Sometimes we don't need to know with utter precision where the person is, but we know that we sense that the person is putting full pressure, and we do help the person. I'm talking about as a spiritual director, and we try to sort of make sure that the person is keeping the pace and keeping growth. The rest, it's between the person and God, you see. So is there a necessity to measure with utter precision? No. When John of the Cross describes the graces that God gave us, describe them in the book Spiritual Canticle, he says, I'm giving you an idea of some of the graces that God gave us, but it's impossible to describe all the graces that God is giving us, you see. So let me see here. No problem, Marty. You go ahead. Okay. So you see what I'm trying to say. So what is the use we can make of all this, and what are there other elements that we need to know? I would like, if you don't mind, also to enter in certain aspects. For instance, in the case of the spiritual director, or spiritual direction rather, not spiritual director. As I mentioned earlier on, the biggest obstacle for the spiritual director and for the directee also is that the spiritual director doesn't see the person living on a daily life. on a daily basis. So he doesn't see how the person responds to certain things. Thank God, on one hand, thank God that we're not here just watching people, how they behave, etc., which would be a bit silly. But this information, part of it is very important, because you have spiritual life, you have a life of prayer, and you have a spiritual life. Spiritual life covers the 24 hours and the 7 days. While life of prayer time, sorry, I meant to say prayer life and prayer time. Prayer time is the moment where I pray. As St. Teresa of the Child Jesus says, the majority of the moments of my prayer, I feel distractions and need to sleep, especially in summer, because the Carmelites nuns have their fields and they work, so they are very tired by the end of the afternoon. So obviously an hour in silence in chapel after a long day of effort, physical effort, of course you tend to nod a little bit. This is normal. So she says God gives me more graces during the day than during the prayer time. Does this mean that we don't have to pray? Of course, no, we have to pray. We continue to pray. But you see, so we have prayer time and prayer life, or spiritual life. Spiritual life and prayer life covers the rest of the day. When you look at Therese, what she writes, especially toward the end of the story of the soul, she talks about charity, the love of our neighbor, the love of the sisters, and all the struggles and obstacles she had to face, which all of us have to face. And charity is very important. Charity is a fundamental element of growth that boosts our growth. And this is why Teresa of Avila puts charity as one of the 3 virtues, and it is the central virtue, evangelical virtue, to sort of support the prayer of the heart, you see. So you can pray 24 hours, but if there is no charity, what's the point, as St. Paul says, no? So the enormous obstacle is that with the spiritual director, and you cannot convey, the spiritual director doesn't see, and you cannot always convey what is needed to be known in your reactions. Because spiritual direction is not like confession, where you say only the negative things, the sins. Spiritual direction also, it's an information where you want to hear what is happening. So sometimes the person feel a bit ashamed of like bragging, you know, like saying, oh, I did this and I did this and did that, or made that effort. You know, sometimes you don't say it, but this is a piece of information that is essential for knowing if you're growing or not. In your eyes, maybe not, but charity, humility, and obedience are the points of reference for the spiritual direction, for better said, to know if there is growth or there is no growth. You see what I'm trying to say? So this is an enormous obstacle. Also, another obstacle is what you say. You don't know what you're saying. Is what you're saying is useful or not? Sometimes you can lose a half an hour telling us an entire story, while in fact you should have been focusing on something else, and you don't know it. You do it genuinely. You see, you do it with no bad intention at all, but you need to know that there is a need also to know certain things in order to grow. So you see how knowledge here is important with obstacles in the same time. These types of obstacles that I'm mentioning. One of the classic conditions for spiritual direction to work, which is a little bit like confession, is to reveal all our thoughts. Very challenging. It requires a lot of humility and trust here from our side toward the spiritual director, to open totally and say things as they are without trying to cover or change or modify. A love of truth, the truth of ourselves, a truth of who we are. So that's the condition for it to work, for the grace of the spiritual direction to work. This openness, this revealing and the truth, etc. So you see, it's not an obvious thing. So when we are facing, so let us come back and conclude maybe, when we are facing this type of reading and knowledge, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to aim for it? Answer is yes. Are we supposed to know, absolutely know, with detail where we are exactly? No. I would say roughly yes, but precisely not always. You have doubts, you voice them to the spiritual director and you listen carefully. But of course, it's very difficult because does the spiritual director, can he or she cover the whole needs, your whole needs? Sometimes no. This is why Teresa of Avila would continue to ask different theologians until she gets the real answer from God through them. So we can never dismiss spiritual direction. We can never dismiss searching and seeking a spiritual director. But sometimes you have to be content with whoever you have, because what matters in the end is, as I said, these 3 points that John of the Cross mentions: to live in faith, use your reason and the commandments of God to be guided. If you are at least inside of this, well, at least you're not deviating. You're not deviating. Now, are you really growing? That requires a bit more attention and a bit more experience and discernment from the part of the spiritual director. Okay, now I could go for hours and hours just to expose and clarify more, but I think that with these elements, one can already sense the meaning and the reason of this knowledge that was given from God to us through different saints throughout the ages, from the early writings as the Gospels themselves. There is a journey. If you read the Gospel of St. John, you have a journey. You have 6 signs. It's a journey. You have milestones. Every sign is a milestone, and then you reach the big sign, which is the cross itself. So there is a journey anyway. You can check the book that I wrote on the spiritual journey. I have mentioned it before. You know which one I'm talking about. Let me show it again to you, showing from the Gospels that there is a journey for all of us, the journey of the apostles, the disciples, the follower of Jesus. And then after the centuries after, Origen, Gregory of Nyssa, Dionysius the Areopagite, and in the Middle Ages, Saint Bernard, Saint Bonaventura, and then a few centuries after, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and so on and so on. So we have great saints and masters who talked about the journey. The journey is useful. There is growth. We cannot deny the existence of growth. But the challenge of knowing exactly, that's another thing. So we should do what we think is right to be done, yes, but prudence requires asking for advice, you see? So if you feel deeply that you are supposed to do something, you do it, but please have the humility also to check, ask before or after. I say, okay, I've done that. I was right. Have the humility to say, okay, to question yourself. Was it the right decision? Or is it the right decision? And you learn a lot through spiritual direction. I personally learned enormously from spiritual direction, from the way the different spiritual directors that I had, and I still have till now. All my life I had spiritual directors, because it's important. Otherwise you're alone. You're alone on the journey, and this is very dangerous. It's not good to be alone. So I learned a lot from my spiritual directors, and I continue to learn every day, till the end, till the last minute of my life, I will learn, you see. So you learn from the spiritual director how he or she reacts in front of what you're saying, what he feels important that sometimes you don't feel important, so then it stays in your mind. Why did he say that? It's sort of like, oh, it means that this is important. And maybe it takes you 10 years to realize that this advice, the value of this the advice you got 10 years before, you see. So we are slow also, huh? We are slow to learn. So this is it. Remember, coming back to and closing now, Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus says to her prioress, now tell the story of the repentant nun. Repentant nun. Just to show you the power of God in few hours, what he can do in a beautiful contrition. It's a story that you find in the sayings of the fathers, the desert fathers. You have a nun who, for a mysterious reason, left her monastery and went to Alexandria. I remember Alexandria is the city of sin at that time. It's a big city where you have everything. And then the father, the spiritual father of the monastery, the nuns' monastery, felt sad because of that, and he decided to go and find her and try to convince her to come back, which he succeeds. So on their journey back from Alexandria to the deserts, to the monastery, they are in the desert. There's nothing in the desert, by the way. It's just yellow sand, nothing, rocks and yellow sand, nothing else. So they decide to spend to sleep. No, so she stays in a place. They make the sign of cross on the sand. She stays there, and he goes a bit further, and then he sleeps there. And during his sleep, he sees her soul going to God, and in fact, she dies. She dies this night. So Therese says, look at that. Her contrition, the fact that she regretted her error when she left the monastery and went to Alexandria, was so powerful that it brought her totally back to God. So can you measure this line that you have in front of you now? That cost her just one night of contrition, or I don't know, 3 days of contrition. She was crying maybe all the tears of her soul, regretting what she did, but it was so sincere, so pure, so entire, so total, so determined. Can you measure God's action? One day is 1,000 days in front of you, O Lord. So yes, we need to understand the journey. Yes, we need to understand the notion of growth. That's very important, and it is very much lost today in many places in the church. True understanding of growth is lost in many places in the church, unfortunately. We need to make a bit of effort to come back to a proper understanding, because we went through a rejection of this line that you can see in front of you. In the 60s, 70s, the notion of growth as structured like Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross was thrown in the bin. This is why we are now mending the little bits of the vase that we broke. So yes, we need to know that there are growth. Therese read it and said, I want it. But also in the same time, we need to be prudent with ourselves and have the humility to consult other people, either before or after, better before, but if it's never lost, if you ask after and regret, if you didn't mean it, you are convinced that what you're doing is good. But it's good to ask for advice, because that's a great sign of wisdom and humility. So, I don't know, is this enough?
Well, it's very comprehensive, Jean, very helpful indeed, both to people who intend to be spiritual directors and for spiritual life in general. And it was just one thing I wanted to ask, but I know you can't address it now, it was about perception. And how do you perceive between two things which are good, which is a little bit difficult for me, so I would ask help for that, but another time will do.
Yes, it's true that at a certain point in our journey, we move on from choosing between something bad and something good to moving between, we move toward choosing between two things. One, both are good, but one looks good and the other one but is not, and the other one is looks maybe less attractive but is still good, and it's probably this one the right thing. This is learned through asking advice. This is the transmission of the second level of discernment. The first level of discernment is between something clearly bad and something clearly good. You cannot miss that. No, it's like sin and not sinning. While that's the first level of discernment. It's the obvious almost. Reason can tell us about sin. Now, if you grow if somebody grows, one reaches a point where the discernment is not anymore between these two things, one bad and one good, but it becomes, because the bad thing is so obvious, and then the person will never go there. Now it becomes between a fake good things and a real good thing. And here we need consulting, and we need obedience. Otherwise, sometimes the danger can be very big, because when we go deeper and deeper in spiritual life, we enter in the spiritual realm, and the spiritual realm is obscure. We don't see, we don't know, and the spiritual realm is a mix between spiritual goods, God Himself, and the devil. So how can we discern between the three? That's very difficult. This is why we need the humility to ask somebody else what he or she thinks. But here the spiritual director needs to be really knowledgeable, because the second level of discernment is not that common. It's very common, of course, to have the first level of discernment, but the second level is much less common. This is why your question is how can I put it? Is very important, and don't ever think that any human being, starting with me, can know how to discern, like innate knowledge, like we have it, we possess it already. It's something that we acquire through humility and growth in spiritual life, obedience. This is why many reach this point and then go astray, because obedience is challenging, humility is challenging, and they don't want to listen, they don't want to obey, they don't know how to obey, probably, in faith. Obedience is to God, it's never to a human being, never. But through a human being, that's the challenge, you see. So this is why we need faith in incarnation, not faith just in God, but faith in incarnation, and that incarnation is extended till today. Till now, we have Jesus on earth, present in His servants, in His ministers, etc. Despite all what we hear and see in the church, it doesn't change the act of faith. Remember that. Saint Francis used to go to an adulterer priest to confess, to show that the sacrament is the sacrament, the grace of God will work. Of course, in spiritual direction, hopefully, we have a better case than that one. Okay, so yeah,
thank you.
It's not, you don't have a plain answer. I'm just situating the levels and showing that your question is absolutely normal, pertinent at a certain point, but you need case by case, situation by situation to ask, and then step by step the new discernment will be embedded in us. This is why you see, in order to practice spiritual direction, sorry to jump from one thing to the others, to practice spiritual direction, one needs to be directed also, and directed properly, which is a challenge of life. Okay.
Thank you, Jean.
You're most welcome, Francesca. So thank you, guys, even though Mati had to go. Thank you, guys, and thank you for everybody who is listening and trying to follow these videos. And God bless, and pray for me. And until next time.
Thank you, Jean.
Okay, thank you.